So in this video, we'll be talking about why cueing does not work. So what is cueing? There's like a few types of cueing. Some examples would be directional or positional cueing. It's like whenever you give instructions to someone to move in a specific direction, shift your center of mass on your toes, shift your center of mass back on your heels, or push your ribs up, or flare your elbows. Those are directional cues aimed at like changing how you position your skeleton. And there are other types of cues, which are, if you are working with someone in person, there are visual cues, or even online. That's used a lot where there's like a video explanation of, okay, this is what it looks like, do this or do that, like showing on video how you would be moving. There's also hands-on cueing. If you are in person, you would be basically maybe like changing, like, okay, move your arms this way, and like maybe grabbing their arms and kind of pulling them forward, giving them some direction, moving like specific areas of their body. Don't be creepy. There is internal cues. Okay, squeeze your butt or squeeze your quads. There is external cueing, focus on just pushing the floor away, or those kind of cues. This basically covers the types of cueing. Cueing, movement constraints, and skill drills, I would call them, like skill-driven drills. Those are like the main three ways you would use to change someone's technique. So why does one work better than the other? Cueing does not work when I think of it as like there's like a capacity problem. Like this person doesn't have the capacity to execute better. So you have to open up that capacity for the person. Then they have the prerequisites to actually change that skill.
Yeah, it also comes down to different types of learning. Some people just can learn from verbal things like cues. Some people need constraints. Now that this isn't working, we now have to use an exercise to do a thing. There's some examples that we'll go over that basically say, now we're gonna put you in a situation that allows you to learn it rather than simply just cueing it and saying, okay, we're just gonna feel this or feel that, or like an instructional type of situation.
So cueing is basically the most progressed version of this learning process or learning tools. There is minimal changes to the setup or regression. Is basically very progressed that you're not really changing much. You're keeping the low bar squat with heavy loads, but you're just kind of giving someone some instructions to make some changes. And usually, like the way we think of it, as if you go to college, usually there's prerequisites before you can get into specific courses. This is basically like the most advanced course. This is like the very specific practical courses. Like let's say it's calculus or something. You need prerequisites before you're able to get into those classes. Things like you need to be able to know how to do addition and like algebra. You need to be able to know how to manage your center of mass. You need to be able to know how to manipulate your pelvis and ribcage position. If you don't know these things, you're not qualified yet to use cueing to change these things. You have to kind of teach this person what it feels like to actually change their ribcage, pelvis position, or their center of mass management, or whichever skill is needed here. What are movement constraints? So those are used fairly frequently. We get questions like, what's the variation that was gonna fix my knees locking out early? Or there's usually like a magical variation or movement constraint.
Well, so constraints in general are basically us saying, okay, you can't do something perfectly correctly in free space. So now we have to constrain it, or we have to say, since we can't get here, we're gonna give you a situation where you can. We're trying to put you in a situation where you can access what you're trying to get.
We're basically modifying the movements. There's like a few ways to modify the squat, bench, and deadlift, right?
Right, so there are task constraints, environmental constraints, equipment constraints. Task constraints, for example, you're gonna slow the actual movement down, right? Those are some of my favorites. I like saying, okay, you're pretty even, everything looks pretty good, I think you're losing a little bit of balance on the squat. All we're gonna do is slow it down. That's a great example of a task constraint. We're still doing the main lift, but we're gonna change the speed, or we're gonna change only one layer in, right? I would call it like one layer, right? The next step would probably be like environmental constraints. So since we can't slow it down, it's like every time we slow it down, that doesn't seem to work. It's like, maybe we need something else, like you'd be surprised, even like a box squat or something like that, where you have some place to physically go, you have something to access, something to look at, maybe even. From there, then we can also talk about equipment. How we emphasize, or what kind of equipment we use, can change the emphasis on the load as well. That's another constraint we can put on something to allow the athlete to understand it.
One example would be the SSB, like the safety squat bar. That's basically shifting the load in front of you to help you learn how to drop the hips straight down. That's one use of it. With these constraints, like they are pushing you in one direction versus the other, or they're slowing things down to give you a better chance of learning a specific skill alongside cueing. It's like, okay, we're doing a pause squat or like a tempo squat. I also need you to use this extra time to focus on shifting center mass on here or there, or keeping the rib cage or whatever it is in this position.
And a lot of times you'll find cues work better under constraint. That's the whole idea of the constraint, is you're now making it easier for the athlete to understand. So then cues, also known as instructions, will actually make more sense. So we're trying to help the athlete make sense of the situation. And then, like Anas said earlier, you can't do calculus without algebra, without multiplication, division. There are like steps to the process. So depending on where your athlete is, you then take one step back. Sometimes you take 2 steps back. Sometimes you really have to take all 3 steps back. You need to go all the way down to the bottom, regress it all the way down, and say, okay, we're definitely going to squat, but we're going to be really careful with the load. But we're going to do a bunch of constraints that allow us to really understand what we're supposed to do before we just go out and try and lift something super heavy. Once you go heavy, then you end up in a problem, and then you end up having to go backwards anyway. Topic of this video, cueing doesn't work. It's pretty much the fact that there are steps to make cueing work.
And sometimes cueing does not meet the lifter where they're at, so you have to be able to have other teaching tools to give the person the best chances of learning. The last, most regressed way of teaching someone a specific skill is, I think of them as like skill drills, or like positional drills, people call them. We can think of them as like the most basic teaching tools, because like they're teaching you like the multiplication and subtraction, like the very basic skills. Then hopefully you can bridge from there. What does a positional drill do? It's trying to isolate a specific skill in absence of high motor control demands, things like managing center of mass, managing 500 pounds of load. Those are like very high demands. And like with something a bit more regressed, you take those demands away to give the person better chances of learning how to brace better by manipulating their ribcage and pelvis position or whatever it is. And there are a lot of examples. It basically teaches someone by finding that position and give them more of a feel it learning effect of like, okay, this is what it feels like to brace. I feel my side abs. This is what it feels like to shift my center of mass here or there. This is what it feels like to protract my arms. Then they can take this context and layer it on top of the actual specific movements. Some examples would be like a goblet squat, like a heel elevated goblet squat to shift the person's center of mass back. If the person tends to shift their center of mass forward, that will kind of give them better chances of shifting the center of mass, teaching them how to tuck their pelvis and like drop the hips straight down. Another example, split squats with delayed knee extension for someone who locks out their knees fairly quick. Give them a split squat or like even a goblet squat, teaching them how to delay the knee extension as long as possible. This will kind of give them the context. Then you can start cueing or adding movement constraints after that. Other things that will maybe like a landmine hinge to kind of make it easy for the person to hinge in like an arc. So like that will kind of make it easier for them to get into that position, but you get the idea. That's what the skill-based positional drills or like those like skill-based drills are trying to do. They're trying to teach you one specific skill that you can take and use on your specific SBD work? When is the right time to cue someone versus using movement constraints versus using skill-based drills?
Yeah, so I mean, if I know that my athlete has the ability to do it and all I have to do is just get them, it's like a simple instruction to run a cue by them and then everything is good because I know that they can get there. They just don't put the instruction into practice. Then of course, like, I can verbalize a cue and say, well, just simply do this, right? That's pretty much when a cue is effective.
When the capacity is there, basically.
When the ability is there and the person just simply isn't doing it. And we find that case pretty often, actually, where cueing can be effective in that way. But there are individuals where you will be cueing many, many times and kind of getting the same result, which is a negative result. Usually we'll end up like, okay, we've already tried cueing this, we've already tried cueing that, something doesn't seem to be getting through, so clearly there's a capacity issue. Clearly a movement or capacity, there's something needs to be constrained, something needs to be taught in a different way.
And that's when you regress it to like a movement constraint. That's like a little bit, like you're still loading it fairly heavy, but it gives this person better chances. And it also can open up that capacity too. And like if that does not work, then we would regress it even further. One example would be like myself, I bias a lot of extension when I'm squatting. No matter how much you tell me to tuck my pelvis under me, I've been squatting for over 10 years. I know what it feels like to brace, like I know how to do it, but sometimes I don't even have like the capacity. Like I need to regress things a bit further to create this like movement option or path to actually brace better and tuck under me. No matter how much you tell me to brace or tuck or flank my lower back, it's not gonna happen. I need to regress it back to open up that pathway so it can actually execute better. And it's used everywhere. It's used in school, and in jobs, like you have to go through a training or like a skill building those foundations. Then you go into like the more advanced skills, and like those like the things that like, you can think of as like the SBD, and the more regress stuff would be positional, like skill-based drills to teach like a specific prerequisite.
Yeah, I mean, also one thing to keep in mind, that Anas just brought up is how good you are at SBD has no bearing on if you need to regress something. That's something that's, I think, kind of important, is you can be really, really strong but still need certain things.
Missing pieces, yes.
Yeah, literally.
A missing piece.
Yeah, there are plenty of great lifters that benefit from regressing things down. That's actually what helps them the most. So basically, a highly skilled athlete is still susceptible to these things. There's no, oh, this person has a bigger dots or this person has a bigger something, therefore we can just cue them, or therefore.
To add to that, within the squat, it's like that's the general skill, but there is sub skills. There's like sub skills of the squat. There's like the skill of managing center of mass, like the skill of managing the pelvis position. There's like the skill of creating a rack. Those like sub skills, and like you might be highly skillful overall, but there might be like missing
other scores.
Pieces. Your score for managing your pelvis might be like at 90%, and for you to go from where you are now to make some progress with technique, with skill, you have to bring up this like one sub skill up. One of the best ways to do that is to isolate it.
Regress it down.
Regress it down.
Yeah.
Cool. That was good.